Okay, so welcome to those of you that are joining us so far. We're going to give a few more minutes for people to join. It's clicking up pretty quick, so once I see that number start to plateau, and maybe after about one more minute, we will kick off. We'll give a technology buffer here for everybody to be able to join. Okay, it looks like we're getting kind of a steady set. So thank you everybody for joining this webinar being graciously hosted by the Global Energy Management Program at CU Denver, of which via way of introducing myself, my name is Jenny Bredt, and my day job is Director of Operational Excellence at Renewable Energy Systems, which is a large developer and contractor, global developer and contractor of utility scale and some distributed level in our European countries, renewable generation. And I am also a faculty in the GEM program, so I teach the Renewable Energies course, and I am also on the advisory committee. And one more, I am also an alum. So I speak to GEM with high regard, and today we're not going to necessarily focus on that, but we are going to focus on making the career transition, which is why many people are joining today, and it's why many people go into the GEM program, is to look at advancing their career, whether it's transitioning from different levels within your current world or looking to transition. And so with me today, we have Lee Morrison and Danny Splettstosser, and I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. Maybe we start with Lee to do an introduction, and then Danny. And then we're going to start this webinar, and I should put this out there. This can be very practical. None of us on the call are fluff. We like to get straight to the point. I think you'll find when we talk about skill sets, that's one thing this industry requires, is to speak and say what you want to say and be direct and speak with facts. So once Danny does the introduction, I'm going to circle back to Lee. And Lee actually did make the transition from oil and gas, which not all of you as participants are coming from, but many of you, I suspect, will be. So we'll use that as a starting point to build in what is an approach and what are some things for you to be thinking about in your skill set, and how are those skills transferable. So Lee, if you want to introduce yourself, give a little background.
Hi, thanks, Jenny. Good to be here. I am Lee Morrison. Like Jenny said, I have a fairly long history in oil and gas. I started out as a landman, which is something I absolutely loved doing. And so with that, I always brought a lot of passion to what I did, I believe. I work for AMP Energy here in Denver. This is the U.S. headquarters of a global solar and battery storage company. We're based in Toronto. We have offices in India, Japan, Australia, and other places. But our U.S. headquarters is here in Denver. I'm the director of development here. I manage a pipeline, roughly $750 million pipeline made up of about 50 or 60 projects across, I think, 6 states last time I counted. And so that keeps me quite busy. So Jenny is absolutely right when she says you come to the point and you move on because you don't have a lot of time when you have a lot going on. And so I know Danny is coming from the same spot.
My name is Danny Splettstosser. And actually, for the next 2 quarters, I'm also the CU GEM executive in residence. So for folks who are in the GEM program, talk through people who are thinking about this transition that we'll be covering today.
Great. So let's jump in, and Lee, talk to us about what your journey was. You were in oil and gas. Why did you even think about making the switch a couple years ago? How did you do, did you do research? Did you meet with folks? How did you begin your transition into renewables?
It all started, I did a little bit of all of it. Well, I did a great deal of all of it. And so I started off because oil and gas is so cyclical. The rough patch that we're in right now with oil and gas is nothing new. This goes way back, back to the 80s and even prior to that. And back in, I guess, 2015, 2016, I got tired of the cyclicality of oil and gas and had already had these kind of leanings toward renewables, a strong interest in them. I always looked at renewable energy as just another way to develop. I just call it energy land rather than oil and gas land management. It's how can you develop energy projects on land. And so I started getting increasingly interested in making the transition, and I started researching. And researching is very easy because there are thousands and thousands of LinkedIn jobs and Indeed jobs. You can just go online and read all these job descriptions and start putting together your own job description of what you'd like to do, what fits with your background. So that's step one. And then I also just started reaching out to other connections, friends of friends, meet them for coffee, try to learn about the industry and what they do. And then Jenny came along, and I met Jenny through the GEM program. And Jenny said, "Oh, we've got some postings at Res. I ought to check them out." So I did. I took a look. I looked at the developer positions, and those were just line by line everything that I had done for the last 8 or 10 years of my career. And so I did more research. We met, we talked, we hit it off, and that's how I launched into renewables.
So just to emphasize a couple points that Lee brought up, I get, and it's fine, I get cold calls about, how do I make this transition? But what made the conversation with Lee that much more enjoyable and what's in it for me, I have to approach everything what's in it for me as well, is giving help for you, is Lee did his research. So he, like he just said, he looked at the job descriptions and he formulated his own idea of what he wanted. And if you come to the table when you have these first introductory coffee meetings or virtual Skype meetings that we're in now, that's going to help the person, help you decide where you might fit. So really, that's, if I said, take away one thing, and we'll have a few of them at the end of this, that's it. Go, there's so many options out there with renewables, whether you're looking at being at a development company, a construction company, an engineering company, a O&M company. There's so many options, and I can appreciate it's very hard to know where to start. But look at those. You have a lot of resources. Start thinking about what your skill set is. And I always encourage everybody to strip that oil and gas. So I went out and monitored production wells. Okay, well, what does that mean in just a skill set? So strip your resume down from that super specific that pegs you to an industry and take it up to, I did data integrity for XYZ. So take it to that skill set level. I recently have had people send me the resumes and they're very heavy oil and gas, and I say, well, talk to me about your skills. And they're able to tell me about their skills very easily, but their resume read like all they knew was oil and gas. And so think about when you're looking at those job descriptions where it says renewable, ignore that for a minute. Focus on what the actual skill is that they're talking about. And Danny, in your various roles, you and I went from a ski shop employee really into energy, mostly renewable. So I didn't have too much of a transition. Maybe if you did any sort of transition, and then more specifically, what I'd like to get from you for everybody is when you look at applicants, what are those transferable skills? I always tell people when they say, but I don't have a degree in renewable energy. Well, surprise, none of us do, really, right? So when you're looking at applicants, are you looking for in some of those key skills?
Yeah, maybe I'll give you a sort of a little bit of an insight. So my role into renewables started quite a while ago. I came into it fresh out of grad school in 2007. And for me, it was a time that there weren't, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies and jobs that were out there that were available. I did have a sense that the energy transition was underway, and that if I wanted to be in a career where my career would grow, I wanted to be in an industry that was growing. And so the first thing I did is I really I created basically my own, if you're a visual person, I created my own web of trying to figure out who's in the marketplace, who's hiring. And I would just read about a company. Oh, this company does development. This company does equipment sales. This company does construction. This company. So understanding the ecosystem of the companies, and you don't have to have it perfect, but try to understand what types of companies are out there and what they did. So that was one of my first steps, was just looking at lots and lots and lots of companies and trying to classify them as best as I could to create that sort of ecosystem of what's out there. And then from that, I applied to every and any job in which I felt comfortable moving to that state or moving to that location. And I would not kid you that if I said I probably fired off 1,000 applications. So a lot of them electronic even then, and even now. I mean, it's just getting yourself out there and doing as many interviews as you can, and just putting yourself out there. And there were a couple opportunities I had pretty early on that just didn't quite feel right, and moved on. I also over applied. This is something that I think I do, but I would encourage everybody to do. Even if you don't meet the exact qualifications, put yourself in there. Throw yourself in, and you'll be surprised. I might say that I want 5 years experience, but if I get the right candidate with the right type of skill set, and we can talk about that in a little bit, that quickly can get brushed aside. But for me, in my transition, I came from a liberal arts and a policy background. I knew a little bit about renewables. I had spent, basically taken one class in my law school that was about renewable energy finance, and I knew a very, very little bit, but I just did a lot of market research and anything I could find and just consume, whether it be podcasts, news articles, publications, and just try to get myself familiar with the language of the space and the trends of the space. And even if I didn't know them perfectly, I at least had a hunger for the knowledge. And so, to answer your question, Jenny, when it came to me, when I got hired on, I got to the end of the interview process with the first company that I joined, which was EDF. And the person on the other side was, a Harvard MBA. We were talking about discount and cash flow analyses and really quite complicated, financial structurings. And he gets to the end and he said, do you have any questions for me? And I said, yeah, first question for me is, are you sure you don't want an MBA for this job? Because I don't have one. And I was just real honest about what I did bring and what I thought, and what he pointed out is that it was a hunger for knowledge. It was a hunger to learn. It was a willingness to work hard and use my skill set, which is, for me, my strengths are communication, broad-based thinking, systems level thinking, and then also being able to, keeping an eye on the horizon through systems thinking, being able to dive deep on any particular element and work very hard on a particular focused element. And so for me, to answer your question about what I look for in a candidate, particularly for folks who are transitioning, I don't need you to know the industry. I don't need you to know the insides, outs, and backwards and forwards of how a solar project gets put together or how tax equity flip structures work. But what I am looking for is for people who are great communicators. I'm looking for people who are really hungry to enter the space. I'm looking for people who really have a desire to learn and a lifelong commitment to learning and changing and adapting. And so if you show that flexibility and that learning and that adaptiveness, that's what I look for. And it's really those soft skill sets that matter to me. And if you have those, I think you can shape where you fit into any company, whether it be renewables or marketing or software or anything. Those are the things, those soft skills are what I look for.
Yeah, I think one point I'll summarize there is both you and Lee have this, and a lot of colleagues have this insatiable appetite for learning. And what I tell my students who say, where's the textbook for this class? I say, there is no textbook. We're not wildcatting anymore in renewables, but we don't have, ISO standards for every bit and piece of our industry. And so we all have to drink from the fire hose and learn. And if you, this isn't to turn anybody away, but if you are the type of personality, and it's totally okay to have this personality, if you're the type that needs the playbook in front of you, renewables, certain aspects of renewables may or may not be for you. You have to have that appetite to learn. The book's not going to be in front of you. Now, depending on your company, they may be very well structured, and you may have, I worked for the government. I went, the first out of the ski shop job out of college was with the government. Now that is a process and book oriented, and it was somewhat laid out, but I still had to learn and teach myself a lot of the aspects of the industry. So there's no playbook. We're not going to be able to hand you a playbook on how to do your job in renewables. I mean, if you're a civil engineer doing civil engineering, perhaps that's different. But if we're talking about the sales aspects, if you're going to be selling equipment, or if you're going to be developing or constructing, we are a mature industry, but we're not to the point where everybody's got it scripted. So there's a lot of self-starter skill set that you need to have to do this. You're not going to be set out there adrift and without a life raft. But with Lee, what we looked for was that basic skill set, and it was great that he would go learn and then come with a question after having thought through it. I think that's a really important skill set in renewables, is you have to be able to formulate and see something and formulate your thoughts to come to those who have that experience.
And so I wholly agree with Danny on this. This is, and you both, you too, Jenny, this is extremely entrepreneurial industry, and there isn't really a business model that has been hammered out that everybody does the same way. You've got to come to this industry, no matter where you are in this industry, it's going to be very entrepreneurial. And so when I'm looking at people, I agree with Danny. It's like the very first thing I'm looking for is I need super smart people. I need agility. I need people who are highly collaborative, because this industry is even more collaborative than oil and gas. It is such a complex, high pressure, fast moving industry. We have got to all work together to move projects across the finish line as a team. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for people who really get along well. I'm looking for a lot of these soft skills. Somebody with initiative, somebody who likes to dig in and figure things out and put puzzle pieces together. And so that's why I do tend to like even some of the engineering people from oil and gas that just feel like a petroleum engineering degree isn't going to qualify them for renewables. But I think you should change your narrative, change your own conversation that's going on in your head, and redescribe who you are. You're not a petroleum engineer. You're a problem solver, that sort of thing. And you know how to process and synthesize data. You know how to form arguments. That picture yourself in that role, because those are the kinds of things that we need. None of us have a playbook, and so it's very important to work on the soft skills.
Yeah, I think what we have to recognize is that this is a disruptive industry. We are a disruptor, and that disruption is not happening overnight. It's going to be the disruption of the next 50 years. But that is why it is an agile and adaptive marketplace. And I think as well, for people who are willing to have faith in their own skills of being able to stretch themselves intellectually, it's a great opportunity to grow. And so the flip side of there's no playbook is, thank goodness, because now you get to create the ways that this industry is going to grow and adapt and change. And on the other hand, and a hand in hand with that, there are times that this industry will smack you down and change things overnight on you, and you have to be prepared to have resiliency and how to fight through that as you're making that change.
I think that's one, hitting on that point. And Lee, you got this by drinking from the fire hose, and I always joke with my students because they start on Friday thinking with a perception renewables has this yellow brick road, and if we just follow it, at the end is everything we could ever imagine, and it's paved with gold and it's wonderful. By Monday, about 90% of them are saying, why do you bother, right? And I think that's something that a perception is out there, that renewables somehow gets a free pass. And if Lee and Danny and I tell you anything, if you take away anything from this, it is anything but a free pass. Not having a playbook means you have to go teach every single community or stakeholder you engage with what your playbook is. And it's probably different than the developer who came in before there. So it's a blessing and a curse not having that playbook. And it is, I think if you talk to every single developer out there, and I will actually, after this, we'll talk about some of the other positions, but we're all really biased from the developer perspective. Every developer out there will tell you they've been punched in the gut, that they absolutely have felt like they were going to throw up at some point in their career. And if they don't admit to that, they're lying to you. It is the most emotional roller coaster. And this is where you have to balance. You have to be extremely skilled in stakeholder management. You have to be relatable. You may have never lived on a farm in your entire life, and you have to sit down at the farm table and have a real conversation with people about leasing their land for 50 years for a wind farm, right? It's the same thing you would have to do for oil and gas, so that's no different. But you also have to be really thick-skinned because you're going to get blasted. It's a power plant at the end of the day, and you are proposing change, and nobody likes change. So it doesn't matter whether you're trying to pitch a new idea to your stakeholders, that is change for them. Whether you're trying to pitch a new idea to a community, that is change. And so you are really a skill set, I would say it's as equally important, communication skills, is you have to be a leader of change. You have to have extreme change management skills, because everything you're doing is changing something for 99% of the stakeholders you're engaging with. So you have to really hone in on those change management skill sets that's going to facilitate everything for you. I don't know, Danny or Lee, if you have anything to.
Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
I could add to that too. A vast majority of the jurisdictions where we're building projects right now don't even have a regulatory framework at all. So we first have to coach them what needs to show up in their ordinances, and work with their planning boards and their conservation commissions and so forth as much as possible. But those people are learning. They have never imagined this kind of stuff coming to their communities. And so we are having to, like you mentioned, we have to teach them first, and we have to pull the whole company along and the whole community along for the ride. And then we have to deal with the opposition, and we have to deal with these incredible gut punch regulatory changes that pop out of nowhere and just wipe out 25% of your portfolio overnight. And so those things happen. And so, yeah, agility is super important, and also patience and being a good teacher and a good community steward, leading people through this. This is a huge change you're asking them to make in their lives, and you've got to hold their hands while they get through it.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that sentiment. I think the renewable energy industry has a bit of a halo effect around it when it comes to investment. I think it has a bit of a halo effect around it in terms of the desire of people to help effectuate the change, and I think that's a good thing. But it kind of stops there. It is a lot of block and tackle, hard, basic skill sets, and maybe to expand beyond just development, which was obviously our collective backgrounds. There are lots of other related capabilities. So if people have a sales background, whether that be working with landowners and really focusing on that side, or it could be in the sales of equipment or construction services. There are people whose pure job is just pure business development. And I actually have met a couple folks who, through the CU Gem program, that I saw them and they are just amazing, amazing people. They just have the type of tone and voice and energy that you just, they're born salespeople, and you want to hear more from them. There are plenty of jobs, and not just in renewables, across any industry with that type of skill set. There are also folks that I've met that are engineers, they are problem solvers. And the ones that have really caught my eye are, as Lee was sort of saying, folks that recognize that while they might not be able to, they don't know the ins and outs of how you engineer a wind turbine foundation, they certainly know how to assemble the civil aspects of, an oil and gas field, and solving problems about crossings and constraints, and really working your way down to the little tiny postage stamp size areas you actually get to work through, and being able to communicate effectively with landowners, construction contractors, developers about how to pull that together. There's an incredible amount of work that has to go into the civil and electrical aspects of these. And so we find, there are plenty of engineers that make that transition. Again, so long as they're adaptive in their thinking, it works really well. Folks who work in the financial side, these are, while they're highly complicated in some of their structuring, fundamentally, these are annuities. These are big, fat investments where you put tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in place. And basically, once you put that out there, the fuel is free. The operational costs are incredibly low. And you just have to be able to work through financial modeling and understanding the basics of discount cash flow analyses and how a financial model works. There are tons of people who work in the FP&A side on oil and gas. And so long as you can get your head around the fact that the investment looks different and the returns, aren't as sort of production related out of sort of or OpEx driven, there's great opportunities for folks who come from the financial background. And so, I think going back to what Jenny was saying earlier about if I see a CV that comes across my desk, I want to see not what you've accomplished. If you're staying inside the industry, list out your accomplishments. Completed this field, completed that field, built this many whatevers. But if you're changing, then your focus needs to be about, project management, like developed project management skills, problem solving skills, communication skills, team alignment, joint venture negotiation, contractual management. Focus on not the what, but maybe the how. You got something done. And I think if you kind of change your CV to the how you get things done in your day-to-day job, that really gives me a sense of what you actually are capable of doing. And I find, that and a solid conversation can really go a long way.
Yeah, I think that's great. Let's see. I'm wondering if I'm kind of thinking round robin, because this is going to be a big list, but if we each collectively talk about the different, to get us out of our developer mindset, but Danny listed out a few. So I'll get us going and then feel free to build on this. So you have engineers, you have environmental consultant companies, and that would be into biologists. It would be into GIS. You would have legal, paralegal, and lawyer, accounting, finance, geology for topography. We're doing, whether we're putting a turbine in the ground or we're putting solar piles in the ground, we have to understand that subsurface. So there's transferable skills.
Procurement, estimating, project management.
HR. I mean, think about the true soft HR, payroll, What else do we have? Stakeholder management, PR, media.
Yeah.
PR is huge, right? Media. What else, Lee?
Yeah, you mentioned the engineering and design. I thought most everything that we do is driven by project management principles and also by finance models. So those are super important skills to really highlight, to build on. Um, I would even say a limited degree of the tech science. We need I look for people who might know a little bit about like a DC-AC ratio when you're talking about electricity. I look for somebody who might know a little bit about batteries. That's a big emerging field. And sometimes I think it's really good when you're in renewable energy. You're basically talking about power generation. So you need to understand ISOs and how electricity is traded and moved around the country and how the grid is made up, so forth. And with that, one thing that helped me a lot was a book from several years ago, well, 2016, which seems like an eon ago, called The Grid. It was a really good history and introduction to how the grid is made up and how it works and how we got to such a completely dysfunctional machine that it is today. But it gives you a really good high-level understanding of those kinds of things. And so I'm looking for, in addition to all those soft skills and transferable skills, I'm looking for somebody who's just at least got a peek at knowledge of what we do, because I know there are very few people out there that have in-depth knowledge or broad knowledge of this industry, but you need a foothold, you need a starting point. And so those are some things that I look at.
Mm-hmm. Something you just said, I don't think you were meaning to get me to this point, Lee, but you did. Starting point. When we first sat down, I think one of the most important things you said to me, and this is a skill that I personally look for, is humility. Is you said, hey, Jenny, I'm even willing to take a step down. And I think that's really important, because I get a people that, whether right or wrong, and I hope some of you prove me wrong, expect a completely lateral, if not lateral to advanced movement from oil and gas to renewables. And best of luck to you that can do that. But I think you have to have a little bit of humility and say, I'm entering, sure, it's energy, but I am entering a new realm. And so, Lee, do you want to talk about that, like how you maybe came in? And I think it's really important because your step down has now catapulted you up. So it wasn't a very long-term step down.
Well, that's the whole idea, because like Danny said, it's such a growth industry. It's very hard to predict where you're going to go in a very short time. And so, but one thing that turns me off faster than anything in an interview is when I'm interviewing somebody, is when they come in and they start telling me about everything that they know. And it's like, you can't imagine how little you know when you're coming into this industry. It is going to be a mountain that you're going to be climbing over. And so what I'm really looking for with people is that I wrote down that exact word, humility. It's like, I need people who know that, yes, they have some skills. Yes, they're awesome people, but they have a lot to learn, and they admit it, and they are ready to jump in and do it. And so, yeah, that humility is super important. And then it also, I think, because again, the collaborative nature of the industry, you're not going to do this by yourself. You're going to have a lot of help, and you're going to have a lot of people who are smarter than you, no matter how smart you are, that are going to have to help you out. And so you've got to take a step down, get rid of your ego, get rid of your arrogance, and, and to admit that it's going to be a challenge, but that you're up to it. So that's what I really like, humility.
I'll echo that, and maybe from somebody who's not just Lee Morrison or Jenny Bredt or Danny Splettstosser, but maybe about a month and a half ago, there was a piece that was floating through LinkedIn that was actually Jamie Dimon of Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and they were asking the same questions. What are the 5 things that are most important to you? Jamie Dimon is sort of somebody who's coming into your team, and his piece was, particularly if you're in transition, don't be thinking about this is your next career. Be thinking about what is the next thing you can learn, and taking particularly a transitional movement as, look, this is temporary. and I acknowledge as being temporary. And if I am as good as I think I am, and if I'm as worth as much as I think I should be, then this period of time will be only as short as, in that sort of step over and move down, it'll be only as short as you're capable of displaying yourself as being. And the most capable people, they are incredibly humble when they come in, and they let their work product show up for themselves. And at that point, once you've established yourself and you've established your credibility, it is very easy. And companies want to promote from within. So once you've established yourself within the company, I actually find generally, but again, in a pretty dynamic environment, you can become a strong advocate once you've started to show that you are, you're a known quantity and that you are capable of really delivering value to the company. And so, I would recommend, if you can find it, again, it was a Jamie Dimon piece. I think he was through Bloomberg, and it was a pretty quick, maybe 4 or 5 minutes with him. But if you can pick that up, that's worthwhile hearing, and hearing it from somebody who's, running one of the largest investment banks. But yeah, being able to move laterally and then letting your trajectory grow once you've made that move.
I think that's really important point, and a couple things that stuck out for me were easier said than done. And what's tough about breaking into our industry is there is a large culture of promoting from within, because you get in and you earn your stripes. You get projects across the line, or you reach a strategic agreement with a turbine supplier and you want to move up. So when you're in a company, there's a strong drive to keep advancing. And to Lee's credit, he came in, he's been in oil and gas for a very long time and made maybe just a touch down, but now he's gone back up. So it was his trajectory. He chose that down and then up. But you can move up very quickly. And the hitch in that, where it's easier said than done, is, okay, well, Jenny, Danny, Lee, tell me how I get into the industry. And I think where I would start this part of the conversation is, it's that willingness, first and foremost, looking at those job descriptions and saying, what do I actually like? I get a lot of people that ping me and say, well, send me the job description if you think I'd like it. I don't know what you'd like. I barely know what I like. I barely know what I want to be when I grow up, right? So I wish I could help you with that. You have to look at those job descriptions and start formulating so that when you see things pop up, you, like Lee did, I said, hey, well, here's a couple positions that are open. I mean, a very seamless transfer when I look at oil and gas is, you're a landman, you can do the same thing for wind and solar. So that's seamless. And I said, look at these. He took it on himself and said, well, yeah, actually, that lines up really well. So you have to do some of that lining up of that dream job you want. But you also have to induce that humility and say, what do I want to keep seeking that dream job, or do I want to go down a level, get in at that company, knowing this industry does do a lot of self-promotion? And so that's something you have to weigh, of what your timing is and what your objective is. I say it's really hard, speaking, like super narrowing it in Colorado, due to our market, electric market. We're not a huge mecca for energy companies. You go down to Houston, there's going to be a ton of jobs. More people are coming to Colorado. It's not like it was in the early 2000s. Portland used to have a big scene. East Coast is growing, but we in Colorado, I think we attract a lot of energy professionals from traditional oil and gas. And I can't say that there's a one-to-one job placement for all of the oil and gas professionals in Colorado that want to stay in Colorado. Now, if you're willing to open up your geography, I think you have a lot of opportunity. But just know there's not a lot of large companies hiring a lot. Danny's shaking his head, and this is good. See,
yeah,
the good thing about Danny and Lee and I.
I wouldn't necessarily agree. I think, while I would hear you and probably take your point that there are cities that probably have an overall larger number of renewable energy opportunities, there's actually a pretty healthy industry here. A lot of it is sort of small to medium, they're not gigantic companies. There's 2 or 3 or 4 that have sort of major offices here, but there's not, there's a great ecosystem of small and medium-sized companies, and those are growing companies. Those are also companies that are willing to take maybe more of a flyer, quite frankly. I do agree with you, Jenny, that by moving, there are more opportunities. California has both in the Bay Area as well as Southern California, Houston, Chicago, I think Virginia and North Carolina have a fair number of opportunities. There's a little bit in Minneapolis, and then quite a bit in the Northeast, sort of Boston area particular, I would say. Those are the places that I see, but it's really quite spread out. And I find that, if I get a really good candidate, even if I don't have a time, I've got usually a half dozen folks, like Lee in another small to medium sized growing shop, maybe a regional headquarters or something like that. Hey, I came across this person. You looking for somebody? Hey, and I think, for me, and I always love, and I take this to anybody. If you ever want to have one of the most enjoyable sort of rewards of being in a profession, get somebody a job, help them get a job, and pay that forward. I've had people help me and help me in transitions, and I owe them a great debt of gratitude. And I've also had people that I've helped them get a job somewhere where it's, you make a recommendation or you push something along, take the time to do that, because it comes around full circle. And I try to do that, and I would recommend that to you all as well. Even if when you make your transition, or when wherever you're at, if you ever get that opportunity, help people get the job, and you'll be surprised about how big the network you can build, and those people become your colleagues and your peers, and that's helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I this sort of is addressed at one of the questions from one of our viewers today, that I would recommend looking for smaller, more entrepreneurial type organizations, because there's going to be a lot more room for growth and a lot more opportunities to do a lot of different things. And if you don't get into that kind of an organization, at least get to one that has that kind of a attitude, spirit of how it's run. So in that respect, yeah, I agree with Danny. Denver area is particularly good with small and medium-sized renewables companies. It's also the home of NREL, which I think spends a lot of technologies and a lot of just incredible world-class research that leads to additional development of renewables companies here in the Denver area. I also want to mention too that I've never really realized in any industry, any job I've ever held, how distributed this industry is. It's like we have people all over the country, and you don't necessarily need to be in a certain spot. I can work, the majority of the projects I work on are in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and New York, and I do that from here. And we also have people in those markets, but it's not entirely necessary, except for just a few things. So you've got a lot more flexibility in how you work. And then as far as like maybe some of the footholds you might look at, especially moving over from oil and gas. So the obvious connections with land management, contract management, landowner relations, land databases, all of that sort of stuff. We're very, very heavily emphasized title work. That's something that where I'm finding that title quagmire every single day on a number of projects. Lease analysts, division order analysts. There's room for skills that you can bring into renewables, doing the very same type of role, but broadening into lots of other areas. And we talked about engineering with there's all kinds of CAD design, solar designers, wind energy designers. These project designers are in growing demand. Other than that, civil engineering is something that we consume a lot of civil services. Environmental services are something that we need a lot of. We need environmental scientists. We need someone who can read and understand an ESA report, someone who knows what to do when they see a conservation commission conditions of permit, that sort of thing. So we consume those services a lot. It's just, you name it, there's just a ton of opportunity and a ton of entry-level opportunity. And once you grab on, it is a carousel, and it's going to take you for a ride. And so you're going to grow a lot as your company grows.
Maybe piggybacking onto a couple of the questions that have showed up, just sort of as I'm reading through the Q&A, there was a question in there about hiring in renewables. Has it slowed? You know, in the larger projects, sort of, which is what, you know, what Res participates in, what Lee does, the answer is generally no. There has not been a slowing of hiring. You know, we have had our own cyclical, you know, challenges, and, you know, sort of paring back and growing. And I think, you know, while oil and gas sees it to an extreme, you know, renewables is not, it's not immune to it. However, I think it happens more at the company level than it happens at the industry level. But overall, I think we continue to see relatively strong growth. I do see that on the smaller C&I side and residential solar side, there has been a slowing and actually a pretty severe cutback, particularly due to the amount of face-to-face interaction that needs to happen in residential and commercial and industrial solar. That has been hurt, and there have been quite a few layoffs in that area. It is just more, you know, business to consumer interaction, and those, as we well know, in sort of lockdown times, are really hard to do. But in the bigger stuff where we're planning for 3, 5, 7 years down the line, the projects we're working on already have so much momentum behind them that they continue to sort of persist despite. The only other one that I, you know, and this is more just in line with, I guess, where my heart always is I'm always looking for the next opportunity. My personality is, like I said, very eye on the horizon. If I were starting my renewable career over today, coming fresh out of grad school, wind and solar are, while there's still a lot of growth in terms of the number of megawatts, again, the sort of ecosystem is in wind fairly stable, in solar starting to stabilize and gel. I see a lot of dynamic activity happening in two aspects. One is energy storage. That is the Wild West. And if you want to have if you have the appetite for a very high growth, high risk, high reward career, I think energy storage is one place. Another one that I think is a good transitional spot, and I see a lot of oil and gas getting into it, is actually, it will be green hydrogen. That is sort of the next horizon as we think about intermittent renewables and high penetration of intermittent renewables. If you start sort of digging down into green hydrogen and the future of a hydrogen economy, that may be a place where folks who are very familiar with storing, transporting, and refining, you know, high energy liquids, that may be something that folks who are currently, you know, on this call have expertise today that is, quite frankly, better than what the current industry has. And I see a lot of big players, BP, Royal Dutch Shell, et cetera, getting into hydrogen. We're seeing it more in Europe than we are in the US, and we can, you know, there are a lot of market factors behind it. But if you're thinking about sort of, I'm early in my career and I'm willing to take a risk and I want to get into the high growth spot where maybe it happens and maybe it doesn't, if it were me, I would be looking at energy storage, solar to some degree, energy storage, and then finally green hydrogen.
And one of my pet industries is, that I always keep an eye on is geothermal. I just think that there's a lot of possibilities with geothermal, and the technology in that sector is also advancing very rapidly. And then also, again, linking that back to oil and gas, there's a lot of very obvious connections there with drilling technologies and so forth. So I always keep my eye on geothermal and hope for that to take off. But I would also keep an eye on the upcoming election. All of the Well, I guess we're down to just the presumptive Democratic nominee has a pretty extensive infrastructure plan, which includes a lot of um, different incentives for for various renewable sectors. I think that the past regime of tax credits, the ITC and the PTC, were extremely successful accomplishing what they set out to do at improving technology and building economies of scale. I think if they spread that out into some other sectors, if they look at ocean energy, at geothermal energy, maybe green hydrogen, maybe carbon capture and storage, there might be a lot of other renewables sectors that are ready to follow a similar trajectory that wind and solar did.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Maybe let me just add one more on, if you don't mind, Jenny, is one that isn't necessarily directly renewables, but is for folks who are a lot in the midstream space. There's a trend towards electrification and the updating of existing infrastructure. There is going to be, over the next 30 to 50 years, incredible amounts of investment in transmission and distribution. As a matter of fact, in my Excel build that I got just the other day, they were talking about Excel has a rider that they are going to be bringing for the PUC, which would mildly increase my electricity bill and enable them to do a couple $100 million a year worth of distribution upgrades to creating the smart, what has been previously coined the smart grid. But I think more importantly, it's just updating infrastructure that's almost 50 to 70 years old. And so for folks who are really comfortable with obtaining, linear easements and working with linear features, and I think power lines and working in the T&D space, we will continue to see really consistent investment, and particularly in any future infrastructure bill. And I don't care right or left. I think you're going to see electricity infrastructure just be part of any future infrastructure investments in the U.S.
So we have a lot of questions. I don't think we're going to be able to answer them all, everybody. Hopefully, maybe we can do a part 2 of this in a couple months, but we have 7 minutes left. And I think one question that's sitting out there, I'm super keen to hear both of your perspectives on, and is, I think it sums up kind of some of the points you made, and kind of might be a good ending point depending on how long we talk about this. But considering the current global situation with coronavirus, and I would put the asterisks upcoming elections, can renewables act as a springboard for job creation? And what's needed to make that happen? I have an opinion on this, especially when I watch all the political debates. I tend to start fuming in certain aspects, but I think I might have a different view than you two. So what do you guys think?
I think the answer is absolutely. Currently, the solar energy industry employs more people than the coal industry and just coal generation, and not coal extraction and generation combined. And I think we are at a spot where most of our existing generation is coming towards the end of its natural life, and we are electing to make the change to what's smarter and better. I no longer use a tube-based cathode ray TV. I have a flat screen TV. And that's what we're doing, is we're replacing the equivalent of our TVs in every single household, but instead we're replacing the way that we power those. And I think that continued investment, irregardless, quite frankly, of coronavirus, and irregardless of this future election, that's a path that's going to continue. And it needs to continue for environmental reasons, I would also say. But that path is going to continue no matter what. It's just going to be a matter of how hard and how fast it's going to go. And I see this as being a coronavirus, whatever the trend was, it's my feeling that it's accelerating those trends. And that's across industry, business, and society. And so we are on a trend, and I think that coronavirus in particularly is accelerating that trend.
And I would tag off of what Danny's mentioned about the grid, about transmission distribution grid upgrades being a center of significant employment growth. I can point to several years ago, I don't remember the exact year, that Governor Rick Perry in Texas decided that it was a good opportunity to build out the transmission infrastructure in Texas. And directly resulting from that and a number of other initiatives, Texas has just absolutely exploded as one of the biggest renewables markets in the country, maybe in the world. So that sort of investment in infrastructure is going to stimulate massive employment that's going to come right along behind it. And so, yes, I agree. If you look at the coal fleet and even the natural gas fleet in America, it's aging. It's no longer efficient, and we have a better way. And so definitely funding this infrastructure development, and even if, again, I agree, regardless of the outcome of the election, I think this employment growth is going to continue. It's just going to get larger and larger. I know I work almost exclusively in solar and batteries. In the solar, we have found a way to recover from the tariffs, the China tariffs, what are often called the Trump tariffs. That was a big stumble, but we've now figured out how to keep going. And I think all solar companies have done that. So if we retain the current administration, I think that growth is going to continue. If we change administrations, I think the growth is going to explode. And so either way, I see a good future for renewables in virtually all sectors.
Awesome. We have 2 minutes left. I think we're going to start seeing some folks dropping off to get onto their next adventure in life. At a high level, some of you want sort of that kind of career specific questions. I would say to my students and former students, I see you in the chat. You know how to get me. We can talk through these things in class, or as Danny mentioned, he's there. Fellow GEM alums, Lee's got to pay it forward for me sitting down with him. Although we might say because he hired 2 other GEMers, he's done it. But all of us are available. I will say we might not be available right when you need it, but ping us. Students, you know how to get me. One closing question. What keeps, looking at your company, one of these questions here that's kind of good. What's the biggest challenge facing your companies? And I can answer from the construction side, Danny, if you want to answer for the development side. Lee, what's the biggest challenge facing AMP today?
Wow, there's so many challenges from day to day. My mind goes from one thing to the other. So I would, the biggest challenge facing us today is I'm going to say that has to be grid congestion. That is the number one problem that we face. That really, when you look at the number of projects that we examine, we probably have a kill ratio of something around 90%. So 90% of the projects that we first start looking at will die before they ever get to NTP or to get built. So, and the biggest killer is grid congestion and grid upgrades that we have to bear the brunt of those.
You ready, Danny, or do you want me to go?
Go ahead.
So from the construction side of Rez's house, and this is something where a lot of skill sets can come in from different industries, having solved problems, thinking about problem solving, is efficiency. We have to figure out how to build sites, whether it's wind or solar or storage, more efficient with fewer resources, whether it's human or material. So a lot of that lean background and looking at the efficiencies of that holistic picture, or even getting down to the minutia of how do we turn the millions of volts on a solar plant faster. So I'd say from the construction side, it's efficiency would be the biggest challenge. We can never have enough of it.
So if you're a lean engineer, give Jenny a call.
Yes.
biggest risk from a development standpoint, near-term tax equity, the way that we use tax as our de facto energy policy, that's fundamentally broken. And I hope that we escape the grips of tax equity and complicated tax equity structures. I think long-term, the biggest challenge for the industry is how do you arrange financing when a project 5 years from now will be fundamentally less expensive because Jenny's really good at finding the cheaper way. How will a project I build today exist and compete in markets when the project of the future is going to be cheaper? And that value cannibalization that happens over time and with higher renewable penetration is going to be a real challenge for this industry. And I think that's the one that long-term gives me the most pause for concern.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't get a mute. Okay, thank you, Lee and Danny and Jem for hosting, and for everybody who hung in there these extra 2 minutes. Really appreciate it. I think key takeaways, if I've summarized, the skill sets that are absolutely invaluable are communication, problem solving, and that thirst for knowledge. You're going to be learning every day, and you have to survive here. So be an insatiable learner and hone those communication skills, whether it's to a family around a table or it's to making your pitch for more money to your executives. I can't speak enough about being an effective communicator. That's a huge skill set. And then in general, problem solving. You will be solving, like Lee just said, you will be solving a problem every day. There are going to be big ones and there's going to be small ones, resourcing, money, that sort of stuff. So think about honing those skills, and really when you go out to apply for those jobs, communicating clearly up front that you are good at that. And like Danny's pointed out a couple times throughout this, you point those out and the world's your oyster as far as jobs. People want problem solving. If you see a job posting, it's because that company has a problem and you have to solve it. So
Yep.
Always approach that application or that resume how you're going to solve that specific problem for them. They've clearly laid out what their problem is. It is bulleted in the job description. So approach your applications that way, looking at it. So really appreciate this. Like I said, maybe we'll do this again in another 6 months time, because who knows what our environment and our worlds are going to look like. By then, might have different backgrounds, might still have the same backgrounds behind us, but thank you everybody for joining. Really look forward, and any questions about Jem, you can go to LinkedIn or go to the CU Denver website if you're interested. And I'll always make a pitch for my class. So if you want to learn more about renewables from the ground up, feel free to sign up for my class. All right, thank you
Jenny.
everybody.
Good to
All
see
right.
you. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.